download an update for my iPad, and it turned into a brick, and I had to take it to the store. Thank God everything was on the cloud because I was furious.
Yeah.
You talking about the iPhone?
So
Well, I would just say I downloaded the supposed fix for the Apple devices this morning.
Yeah,
And froze everything.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Apple's not perfect, as my son-in-law keeps telling me that it is.
We'll wait one more minute. I'm aware of 2 or 3 others who I believe are going to join. And then we'll get started. Okay, we have a quorum. We may have 2 more members, commissioners dropping in. So we'll proceed with the September meeting of the Charlottesville Tree Commission called to order. We have always our first order of business looking at the minutes from the previous month, actually in this case, July, which went out in the packet that Mike sent. Any clarifications, additions, edits? You all have had a chance to read the minutes.
Did anyone else have trouble that there were so many typos and grammatical errors? I mean, I found it hard to read through it, and I was at the meeting. It didn't go through either a spell checker or a grammatical checker. There were verbal endings missing, misspellings. I highlighted some of them, and I tried reading them to my husband, and he said, "What the hell does that mean?" It just didn't read like a native speaker had put this thing together. And I don't know what you do, and do we have to spend time at the meeting pointing out all of the problems? Because if this is supposed to be a permanent record of what we're doing, it's a pretty flawed record.
Jean's a good editor.
Sure, Gene, if you want to send me those, if there's grammatical things you'd like corrected, sure, you can send them along. And, you know, I think as long as it's not substantial, I don't know if I'll defer to Brian if they would like, you know, if it's just grammatical errors or something like that, if that's something that does or does not need to go to the commission.
Okay. I'll do that. Thank you.
So just to be clear, there's nothing in the changes that would change the meaning. These are grammatical.
As well as I could make out what the meaning was. It's, yeah, most of it, I guess people could figure out what it meant.
Well, I think for the benefit of everybody, why don't we say this? We will defer everybody can have a chance to read them, and there's nothing wrong with coming back next month and approving 2 sets of minutes. So why don't you send those, and anybody who has any additional corrections or clarifications, if there's something you have another chance to add, and then just send that to Mike and he'll put that in next month's packet. It's not crucial that we approve it tonight, so,
Okay.
but thank you for noting that. So we will defer on that. That is the only thing actionable under my report. Since we've been 9 weeks, I did want to make a few points and just apprise the commission of a few things. The first is that we continue to have what I think of as significant and encouraging outreach from the community about trees, specifically about condition of trees, placement of trees, and concerns expressed about those things. I think probably in the last 9 weeks, we've had maybe 5 or 6 substantial comments on trees, which we always welcome, comments of any kind. If they are, just since we're public, if they are comments that are about, especially if they're emergency maintenance issues, those should go to Parks and Rec through Mike. If there are comments about placement of trees, if a citizen or resident sees a place where they think a tree could go in public, in a right of way, a park, a school, et cetera, those can certainly be addressed to either the commission or to Mike, because we do consult on those. So again, to the public, I encourage you to keep your eye on the trees, keep helping us, because certainly we can't be, I said this before, we can't be everywhere. So it's very helpful to us to know if you have an idea, if you have a concern about a tree. We try to act on that very quickly. And I would credit Mike for responding promptly and thoughtfully to people who raise those issues. So please keep sending those in. The next item is, I did want to apprise the commission, and I can see him right on the screen, that we had noticed 2 weeks ago that Todd Brown, who's with us this afternoon, will be leaving on October 1st, as of October 1st, as Director of Parks and Rec. In a minute, I will welcome him if he has any words for us or thoughts before he ends his tenure. But I did want to say that the commission has appreciated working with Todd, stepped in obviously a very dramatic and difficult time. And Peggy and I especially appreciate that throughout this year when we were meeting virtually, as we continue to do today, Todd was available to us and we had lengthy communications with him, either by Zoom or by phone. We've appreciated working with him, his passion for trees and for parks. And we're sorry to see him go, but we wish him well. Todd, is there anything you'd like to say to the commission since you're with us today?
Good evening, and thank you very much, Brian. I do appreciate those kind words. I'd like to turn around and give them all back to you all in terms of I've really appreciated the dedication you all give to the city as well as Parks and Recreation. Yes, I am a huge Parks and Recreation geek fan, and that does include trees and all our natural resources. And one of the things that attracted me to Charlottesville in the first place was the passion towards caring for all our natural resources, particularly the trees. And the other thing I really pride myself on is being able to work with partners and sitting down with you all, even virtually, particularly Peggy and Brian and Mike over the last year, and working on our relationship and making it as beneficial as possible for both parties. I take that as a feather in my cap. It's something I'm very proud of and something that I will do, as I continue my career. So thank you all very much. Please keep up the good work. Keep, working with the city on, mitigation of trees when they unfortunately do have to be replaced or come down. I think mitigation is the key word in the future here. And I wish y'all nothing but the best of luck. And again, thank you so much for the kind words and all the conversations we've had.
Thumbs up. We're getting thumbs up and claps. Thank you, Todd. And best of luck to you in your future endeavors. I would also like to take a moment. We're pleased this evening, you probably see on your screen that we're joined by our Deputy City Manager, Sam Sanders. And we look forward to working with him on issues that are of importance to the Tree Commission. And I'd invite him at this time if he would like to say a word to the Tree Commission.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I'm having difficulty with my camera, so I do apologize for not being able to appear fully in person here, but just want to take this opportunity to just say hello to all of you and join in thanking Todd for his service to the city of Charlottesville. We will miss him, but understand that life goes on and we must move on and make decisions that are best for us. I just wanted to share with you all that the commitment to Parks and Rec is there in the city manager's office. And as I am now into the 3rd month of being on the job with a lot to do, that you have my support in doing whatever I can to make sure that the conversations that have been ongoing continue, and then the new conversations for strategy and ways to work together. I look forward to engaging with you on those as well. As we look at Parks and Rec, from my start, the goal for me has been to get the leadership team intact. So my initial decision upon Todd advising that he was leaving was to get an acting team in place. So we do have Vic Garber serving as acting director. Ron Nolan and Sarah Black both have stepped up as acting deputies so that we have a full complement in the leadership roles to help in this moment prepare for the transition and then facilitate that transition as smoothly as possible. And we are actively looking to fill the deputy role and have advertised the director's role. So I just want to assure you that the commitment to the care of our outdoors and quality of life is there. We appreciate the work that has to be done and look forward to working with you.
Thank you. We look forward as well. Obviously, this has been a challenging year for everybody and for all of you working in the city. We see it most directly in working with Mike. Obviously, he's our liaison, and we know that he's been working very hard, particularly at times where there've been some shortages, resources and staff. And so we understand that. We all the more appreciate that we're moving to a position where parks will be fully staffed. What we would hope is, and I'm not sure what the process is, but we would hope that if possible, that the Tree Commission, I know that there are others within parks groups that would have some input on the decision, or at least the candidates for those positions. So that's something we can talk about later, but we do appreciate the demands on parks. And we just want to make sure that as we come out of this year, which again has proven challenging, that we're in a position to plant as many trees and preserve as many trees and just push forward to preserve the tree canopy. So I think I speak for the entire commission in saying that. So thank you all, Mike, Todd, and Sam for joining us. I'm going to turn it now to Peggy. We'll go through our committee reports, and then as we usually do, and then we'll make sure that we allot Mike enough time because he has a good bit to speak to us about. So first we'll go to education advocacy and Peggy.
All right. May I share my screen, Legend? See you around.
And everyone should have screen sharing ability.
Okay. Let's see if I can y'all see that?
We can.
Yep, okay. Just an introduction, and also for Sam, because he hasn't seen these charts before, but the Tree Commission a number of years ago developed some charts, some performance measures, so we could see how we're doing about trees in the city. And also, we also include all these charts in the City Council report, which we do once a year. Normally, our advocacy committee would have been able to get together and look at these beforehand and give some feedback. But Mike was short because our data analysis, Brian Ray, I think that's his name, is actually not in parks anymore. And there is no one doing data analysis right now. So we thank Mike and Brian, who offered to help us this time, even though he's not responsible for parks, for getting them to us for this meeting. So thanks for doing that. So I think, let me go through them. And obviously, as Brian just said, our main goal is protecting and planting more trees in the city. And I'm talking to the choir here, but we want to do that because one thing we really know, recent research has talked about detriment to public health when they're low canopy. It also lowers our neighbors' energy costs. We combat climate change for everyone in the world, and we improve the air and water quality for the city. So with that, let's see how we're doing this year. The first one is our tree canopy. We've looked at it over the last, how many years is that? I can't remember, but 2004. We're going to update it this October, but we don't have that information yet. But you can see that we've lost 5% canopy. We did an informal look at it last year using iTree, which showed that we lost 2% even more. So right now we think we're down about 7%. One thing to note that our target is 50%, but I do want to note that our fellow city, Richmond, which is a fabulous tree city, their goal is 60% by 2037. So it's something to keep in mind as we go forward. And let me see if I can do this right and get to the next one. So I want to show you, what does 7% loss in canopy look like? And many of you have seen this, but maybe some of the new members haven't, or Sam hasn't. 7% loss is 460 acres of trees. So you can see that goes from, basically covers almost all of North Downtown, from 250 to Main Street, down to the Albemarle County Office Building, and almost to Meade Avenue. So it's a huge loss of canopy. And I wanted to show this too. I think most of you have seen this. One of our goals is to increase canopy in the low canopy neighborhoods. And if we look at this, you can see the red and the orange are our lowest neighborhoods, have the lowest canopy. But actually, since this chart is actually wrong, this was, I think, done by the, wrong compared to our goal. Our goal is 50%. If you take that, then only 5 of our 19 neighborhoods are over, are over 50%. The rest of them, 15 of our neighborhoods, are under 50%. So I think we need to update this map. But so we are not doing very well. So let's go on and look at the next chart. This is, our goal is to plant 200 trees a year. We probably need to look at that. It's not going to get us to 50% anytime soon. But you can see over the last 5 years, last 21 was very sad because we didn't get any money in the CIP. We know that affordable housing and schools are taking up most of the money, but we got zero money. So over the last 5 years, we've averaged planting about 107 trees, which is just about 50% toward our goal. So we're not doing very well there either. And to make matters worse, you can see that we're actually removing more trees than we're planting. Over the last 5 years, we've removed 66 trees, and we've planted 539. So we're just replacing about 80%, just the ones we take down. So that's not great either. And this is just show you the new plantings versus replacements. I think it's pretty hard often to replace where trees are when they're just taken down, because you have to get the roots out. But This shows you again, 21, pretty sad year for us. Now, one thing, this is a good chart. Over the last number of years, we've made a priority to plant shade trees because they're the ones that are really going to improve health and combat climate change and reduce heat costs. So you can see over the last 4 years, the majority of trees have been shade trees. So that's a good thing. The next one is trees planted by location. We've actually have made priorities for location, which are not reflected in this chart. So I think it's something we need to work on because we want to plant them in our, some of our priorities are in our low canopy neighborhoods, along right-of-ways, trails and sidewalks. But it doesn't show some of our other priorities. So I think it's something we'll need to work on and hopefully we can get someone to help us. But you can see over the years where we planted them, and mainly it's been in parks. I think that's right. Yeah, the green. So our funding, this just shows what we've requested from City Council when we do our CIP and what we've received. Now, one thing that's, we don't have to end on a sad note because we don't have FY22 there. And we requested 75,000 for 22, which we will do the planting this fall. And we received 75,000. So I want you to know we ended on a better note. It's just not shown on this chart. As you can see in 21, we did not get any money, but City Council made up for it last year. So we have we'll have money to plant a lot more trees this year. So that's the charts. We'll be, Brian will be presenting these. We'll probably tweak them a little bit to City Council probably in December. So do you have any questions or comments? I can't see anybody, so if anybody raises their hand, Brian, maybe you can call on them.
Commissioners, anybody have questions or comments?
Peggy, I was curious about the diagram that showed the 408 acres of loss, 7%. That circle was a graphic representation of the 408 acres?
Yeah. It wasn't where all the trees obviously were lost, just a graphic, so you get an idea of what percentage of the city.
Yeah. Do we have a sense of where those trees disappeared from? Are they from our low canopy neighborhoods? Are they from other areas?
Mike may have some of that information, and maybe it's probably something we should look at. I mean, I'm sure Mike has it. We actually haven't done a chart showing that. That would be probably a good thing to add, Jeff.
Yeah, that would be, those details would be in the canopy study of where the canopy loss was from, but a lot of your canopy loss is going to be on private property, from development and things like that.
So you keep a list, I'm sure, of takedowns that you do on public property, but a lot of it, of course, would be on, that's right, on public property where development occurs.
On private property where development occurs.
Private property, excuse me, on private property, yes.
Correct.
Yeah, this, just if I didn't make it clear, this is really almost all of what you've looked at today is trees on public property. It's when we show, except for the canopy study that's done, which takes into care the whole city, but like the trees that we've lost, those are trees that we've lost that had to be taken down on public property.
Mm-hmm. So some of that, just to continue with that, but I also see Tim's hand up. Some of that canopy loss could be because of infill development that's leading to higher density, right? I mean, some of this it's good that we've got more dense development, but we also still need to keep our tree canopy. But I think maybe there's going to be some way we could talk about that in the future, is to make sure we we understand where that's happening and why it's happening, and then if there are ways to ameliorate it, or if it
Mhm.
is just like, more density.
I would add also commercial development too.
Yeah,
We've seen that recently on several occasions downtown, but that combined clearly is driving that loss. I saw Jean first, actually, so I'm gonna go to Jean, then Tim.
How much would we need to meet our goal?
I think you asked us that before, Jean, and that's a good question.
I guess I wasn't listening to the answer then, because I don't remember.
I think you brought that up once before, and I think it's a good question. And I think it's something we maybe should look at. Of course, you plant a tree today, and it's going to take a long time to make an impact. But I think it's something we should look at. And, I think other communities are doing it, looking to, they have Pakistan is, the country of Pakistan is doing something like 1 trillion trees. Or their goal is
Billions, yeah.
I think it's more than $1 billion now. I mean, I think it's a couple billion.
It's in the billions, yeah.
Yeah, it's in the billions. So I think that's something we should put on our list to do and see if we can figure that out in some way.
I guess the backup question to that is, how do we, once we have a figure, we know what how many trees we tend to lose, we can count on losing in coming years. Replacement plus adding to get to our goal, and when do we want to meet that goal? And then how do we marshal public support for it? Because it's not going to happen just from a few commissioners going to the city council. It's going to have to be a public, large scale pressure to get people to reprioritize trees. At least that's my reading of how you get things done. I mean, it has to move from the people up to the top.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about our program, Seville Relief, because it's obviously not just the city, but it's private property owners planting trees too. And having strong codes and ordinances to protect some of our trees and making sure we're planting more.
Right.
All those things need to go together.
I would just add, before we get to Tim, I would just add, Jean, that's a critical question, and figuring that out. But it also will factor into, we're going to get into the CIP budget process over the coming months. So in terms of our requests to council for funding for next fiscal year, we need to consider that. I think we understand the difficulties last year, the fiscal year, and with the pandemic, and there were a lot of budget uncertainties. But we're always playing catch up, and we're way behind. And at some point, we really need to take a bite out of this problem and catch up in a big way. So in terms of our future funding requests, not just for emergencies like the Emerald Ash Borer, but for routine, important planting every year that makes up for all of the problems that we've seen, including loss and replacement. So we definitely need to do that. And I would say too, the other consideration, we started seeing this last year. Some of you had yet to join the commission, but the price of trees went up significantly. Now, I'm not sure if they're still there, and Mike can certainly tell us that, but we're fighting that as well. We don't get as many trees for our dollars. So we really have to impress upon the community and upon council that, and upon city administration, that we're losing this fight right now for a number of reasons. And we need to have a better battle plan. So that's a great question. Tim?
Yeah, and I think Peggy mentioned that this has to include private fundraising.
Yeah.
Big time with people who've got money, or organizations that have money.
Yep.
Do we know if there is going to be money coming through the pipeline with all this stuff that's going on in Washington for infrastructure and whatnot? I keep hearing about the billions that are going to be made available, but do we have the know-how to tap into that?
Well, I haven't read through the entire infrastructure plan. I guess it's online and we could Google green, and if green is in there, then maybe there's some hope, but I don't know. I didn't get a sense there was a lot for green infrastructure, if anything, but that is a good question. And it's something that we really need we should investigate. Tim?
Yeah, just circling back to a couple things Jeff had mentioned. You had asked if we know where the predominant loss in tree canopy is. And yeah, Peggy clarified this is just within the public realm, those 7% of tree canopy, 7% of the city's footprint, or 7% of the tree canopy, excuse me. I would just say, as the commission's one of the low income liaisons or representatives on the commission, I can provide a quick anecdote, which is that I have seen a lot more trees coming down in the 10th and Page neighborhood than I have seen planted in the last couple of years, including, you know, humongous silver maples and birch trees, including a whole stand of maples at the Dairy Market, Dairy Central project. But that was something else you mentioned I wanted to respond to, which is, you know, when we have these mixed use infill redevelopment projects, that is accomplishing other goals for environmental sustainability and sustainable urban planning and development. But the connection is to make sure that that happens in a form, in a design that allows for some tree canopy to be, you know, integrated into that plan. And that's where I think we can maybe touch on that in more detail in the Codes and Practices Committee report. And we, you know, we'll probably need some help to kind of get over the finish line with recommendations for how the development standards and other aspects of the zoning ordinance can help us get better outcomes, whether it's infill or other development.
Yeah, you touch on a really critical point. Sometimes people think, well, trees and that trees are just this sort of freestanding issue, but it's implicated in every decision that we make as a community, as a city. Every budgetary decision, every priority decision we make impacts for better or for worse on trees. And that, as Peggy said, in turn feeds into the quality of life in the city, so that decisions that we make there impact public health and they impact livability. So, you know, sometimes somebody might be looking from the outside and say, oh, the tree commission, that's a lovely body. They must get together on weekends and plant trees. And we do some of that, but it's actually a really complex social, cultural, and political issue. And more so today than ever. So that's an excellent point. Are there any other comments on or questions?
I wanted to ask one more about this bar chart that we have up. Is this 2021 dollars? Have these been adjusted for inflation, or is that 50K, 50K, 50K just across the board?
Those are the actual, what we asked.
Okay, so we're actually getting less money each year
Well,
in essence.
Well, as I said, in 22, we asked for 75,000. It's not on this chart, it should be. And we received 25,000. So we're getting
75.
for this
75,000, okay.
75,000. We asked for 75,000, we got 75,000. So that's what I want to make sure
Right,
that you realize that it's not
yeah.
21.
thing
we
to
got
know.
nothing. Now, in one of those years, I can't remember, Mike, maybe you do, in 2021, we asked for 25,000 for ash tree removal. But we've never gotten any extra money for that. I think in 20, we asked for ash tree, 25,000. They gave us the money for tree planting, the city council, but not for the ash tree removal. And I think we did the same thing, Mike, in 21, 2550. And
Yes.
of course we got nothing. So we decided in 22, because we were going to ask for ash tree removal, but since we hadn't gotten any planting money in 21, we decided to make it all tree planting. We know the ash tree removal is becoming, if you just drive the city, it's not just ash. There are a lot of trees in pretty bad shape. Oaks at McIntyre, the ash trees. It's going to eat up more of our maintenance budget as time goes by. And Mike's very aware of that, I know.
Yeah.
I
So
think that-
before, I'm sorry,
I
Jeff.
just would note here, Brian, that yeah, as the cost of trees go up, that this should also note inflation. So we're not buying the same number of trees every year if we keep our numbers the same. So it's great we're asking for more, but we probably need to have like a percentage we add each year that's not based on anything other than inflation and the cost of
Right.
labor and material acquisition going up. So we may actually, if we track it that way, we may actually see that our losses are greater and we need to actually ask for even more, just as a fiscal standard.
Well, and now's the time to do that because as I said earlier, we're going into the budget request season. So I think the two things to do, there may be some final tweaks, as Peggy said, to these charts, but the two things to do are one, what we do every year, and this is for the benefit of new members, is we don't present all of our charts. We have certain data that we track. We don't present them all in the annual report, but we generally present a fair amount of this. We try to highlight trends. We try to point out any problems or concerns in the report. We use that to factor into our asks to council and to our annual report, which I'll talk about very quickly in a minute. But what we probably really need to do this year is we need to really look closely at particularly what we've been talking about tonight at the replacement and removal, just all of those numbers and sort of plug them in and get a really good sense of like how far behind we're falling and why. So that can be a real hard point to hit when we report to council in December, because we haven't really put that all together, all the sort of the fine granular data and try to paint the big picture. So we'll definitely do that. The report, as Peggy said, is scheduled. We're 1 month behind just because of the year. We're 1 month behind on the process. So next month there'll be a draft. There would have been a draft this month for the commission to look at. We have the data now. We can tweak it a bit more. We can develop. I'll be drafting the report. The committee will be deciding what the themes are for council, what we want to hit, and then we'll be presenting a draft to the commission next month. The final report to the commission in November, and the goal is to present in December. Normally we present in November. Last year, because of the craziness of the pandemic, we presented in January, but we really do want to stick within this calendar year. So we've got a lot of work to do on this, but we have a pathway to getting it to council by the end of the year. Jean?
One last point, in arguing for more money, obviously inflation, it's inflation of labor as well as the cost of the trees. Has anyone nationally in the forestry profession made some kind of estimate of the increased mortality of trees with climate change? Could we should build, if so, we should build that in and say we can anticipate losing more trees as it gets hotter. Another argument why we need more money.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that kind of figure is available nationally or even regionally or in Virginia. I don't know.
Mike, you have a sense of that? You know, professionally, Mike, if that's, I think Mike may have frozen there. Mike's frozen. All right, we'll definitely circle back and talk to Mike about that. That's a good point. I mean, we do know that this is a little longer term, but we do know that the forest is changing over a longer period of time. So that, you know, I mean, there are trees that no longer grow in New England that used to grow, and trees that don't grow well here that used to grow. So that's a good point. I think Mike is still, oh, he's going to check back in. So we're going to move on to Peggy's got some updates on Seaville relief for us.
All right. I don't want to dominate this whole conversation. I don't know that Todd and Sam are still here. Are they, Brian? I was going to give them a little background.
Todd is with us, yeah.
But not Sam, is he?
He had to go on to Planning Commission.
Oh, okay. I know he's got lots of hats. Well, some good news first. We haven't really done a lot of fundraising except for the initial money because we're trying to get our act together, getting some materials that can explain it in a simple way and be exciting. But the Penn Foundation has just given us $13,000. That's $3,000 this year and $10,000 next year. And my daughter happens, her stepsister is on the foundation, so that was a very nice connection. But we're very appreciative of that. So that's the good news. There's not really bad news, but there's a little bit. COVID is making it more difficult for us to work with the schools. As you know, I mean, our main goal is to plant trees on private property, to have trees planted on private property, particularly in our low canopy neighborhoods. That's one way we can increase our canopy besides the city's planting. But we want to work first, because this probably won't, most of it won't happen until next fall, 22. We want to work and educate kids and families about the value of trees and nature in the city. And then we think that that enthusiasm can bubble up to the parents when we actually go out and talk to families. But COVID is going to make it a little more difficult. We've had discussions with the principal at Venable, and Venable serves the 10th and Page neighborhood. She is going to allow us to do a presentation to the kids in October or beginning of November, probably work with either 3rd or 4th graders. So Lucy Hartlett, who you've met before at Parks, and she runs a lot of classes, we're working on a presentation for that grade. So that's exciting. The environmental science teacher at CHS heard about our program and reached out to me. And we are going to have a discussion with her tomorrow about working with with the students at CHS. And also Carolyn Schuyler at Wild Rock. Wild Rock is an organization that you might know about, but they work along the same goals of increasing kids to play outside and to appreciate nature. She's working at Lugo McGinnis, which is the alternative school for the middle and high school students that have a hard time working in a larger setting. And that is actually right on the border of 10th and Page, on the same block as Venable. The principal there is very excited and wants to do a unit on trees, and Carolyn is going to work with her to develop a unit, and we'll be able to plug in there and with our project, get them interested in not only trees, but show them the possibilities for jobs, not only in the tree care industry, but other the green industries. So that's neat. I think that'll be a good project. Looking long range, we're trying to find some teachers and to help us develop a unit on trees and the value of trees in nature. So that, you know, at the elementary school level, at the middle school level, at the high school. So we'll have a package. We won't have to ask each teacher to develop something on their own, but they'll have a package they can use. So we're hoping that we can find them. I think we may have found the person at the high school. So that's a sort of a long range. As far as tree planting, and you know, we're focused on 10th and Page. The tree stewards are going to be planting a small number of trees this fall. And so we'll work with them on that. As I said, we're working on some marketing, some simple marketing and educational materials to that we can use as handouts or presentations to groups. So we're working on that. On the committee from the tree stewards is myself and Mark. Brian's on it too, but you know, we can only have, you know, as 2 people meet at one time. So Brian will probably have more involved in it after he gets on the tree commission. He's letting sort of Mark and I do it. But we have representatives on, you know, it's from the tree care industry and from City of Promise, Nature Conservancy, Virginia chapter, who gave us our initial $20,000. So anyway, so I think there's some exciting things going on there. And Jean, that's where we'll hope to raise more money to eventually. Now the tree stewards also do a lot of tree planting. And so they're working with us, our partners. And, you know, is there any questions?
I'm
I'm sorry.
No, Vicky, yeah.
Are you aware that the master naturalists are also involved in some tree planting and environmental education?
Yeah,
might be able to get
we're gonna
some
reach
help
out to
there.
them.
I'm sorry.
And someone's giving us a contact. I can't remember her name now, but to reach out to them, and we'll do that.
This is a really great initiative. I mean, it touches on everything we've been talking about for so long, and it addresses some of our concerns. I mean, going forward, this is absolutely going to have to be a public-private initiative. What's great about this is that we actually will be planting, we'll be addressing areas of concern. We're also educating, we're advocating. It sort of touches on everything that we do, and it's really, really fundamental. As we've said before, the commission is obviously very much involved in this effort, is a primary partner in this effort, sees this as being critical to the community, but this in no way removes the responsibility of the city to do its part to maintain the canopy. This is supplementary. It's good that we've been able to do this, and Peggy and her team have made so much progress during the pandemic when there were other things we couldn't be doing. But this shouldn't be seen as something that really fills a large budgetary need. This is ancillary to what the city's responsibility is for trees. But it's all very exciting. So thank you all for pushing this forward. Jeff has been doing some work as well, Jeff Otten. And he sent some materials that were in the packet. So I'm going to turn it to him to talk about tree planting, locations, prioritization. This is the work that the Arbor Committee does in consultation with Mike.
Thank you, Brian. I've got just about 4 slides here, not too many, but a couple things that I'd like to discuss with the Tree Commission and talk about some of the criteria that we are using to suggest tree planting locations and the criteria that Mike uses to evaluate suggested locations for tree plantings. And I think that metric is a good one. And I think Mike will review that later when he talks about his recommendations for tree plantings this year. But I think there are a couple things that we, as a small Arbor Committee group, have talked about potentially adding and thinking about ways in which those added criteria or added locations might then fit in the ranking, and how those elements might then be able to have a number associated with them to then give them either a higher or lower ranking as we think about how trees are evaluated and their locations are evaluated for planting. So that's one of the first things. We'll look at one option that could be added to this list. We already have schools, but adding playgrounds specifically, because that's a place where children spend time outside at school. And then we, sort of late in the game, I must admit, we put out a call to the larger commission to provide some locations for trees to be suggested to Mike for evaluation. Had a spreadsheet and have collated, I'm not sure where the number stands, but it's the last slide in this deck, about, in the 20s or something like that of locations that could be evaluated by Mike. So I think subsequent to this meeting, if those locations, I don't know that we have to vote on them or anything like that, but that we would then take those and have a discussion with Mike about their value and how they might be added to his list. One of the things that I initiated, and I don't think it really has worked yet, but I would like to try and find a way for it to work when we do this next year, and that is to be able to map these suggested locations so we can have a graphic representation of where we are making suggestions, and to be able to overlay that on one of the city GIS maps to be able to see that they're falling into one of the neighborhood locations that we've talked about needing to add canopy. So that's one of the issues that I had with just having a list, is that it's hard to then graphically understand where those trees are falling in the context of the larger city. So I did make a suggestion for adding a little pin on the GIS viewer. Unfortunately, you can't then share that map with a larger group of people because it then loses the markups that you've made. So one solution is to capture a graphic image of that map, but that makes it static and you can't then, progressively add more elements. So I think there's probably a solution out there. I mean, certainly if we used our own, if I used ArcGIS, I could make a map like that, but it would be nice if it was an accessible map where we could all annotate and we could all make suggestions and make this something that we can work on, for several months through the year as we start to think about where are we going to spend more money on tree planting and in what neighborhoods, et cetera, and to make that a little bit more interactive. So that's one goal I would have for this, next year, is to try and figure that out. So to show the next slide here, this is that tree ranking process. I think we looked at this before when we were talking about tree locations and why you would put a tree in a particular location and how that location would be evaluated. So there's a weighting to this ranking. I believe Mike put this together. So you can see in Star Hill or Rose Hill, there's a weighted weightedness to that particular location. And then other criteria having to do with whether a tree is a large shade tree, whether it's in a right of way, adjacent to a school, park, in a cemetery, or golf, or some sort of city facility. And then each of those trees, as you'll see later in the presentation from Mike, get a number, and that helps with prioritizing plantings. We talked briefly, and I think we're going to spend some time next week and actually go out and look at a playground and look at one playground that's shaded and one playground that is not, and to talk about whether it would make sense to add a ranking to a playground in order to then privilege plantings either adjacent to or in playgrounds, and to talk about that with Mike. So this is Venable. One is shaded with some, I believe this is a sycamore, and there's another tree in this area too, and they provide abundant shade. It's a fantastic little playground. And then the other one at Venable, very stark and open. Thank you, Peggy, for these images. And then this is the tree planting suggestion spreadsheet that was a Google Doc that was shared with you all, and it was populated by a couple people, which was fantastic to see. These locations have not yet been evaluated, whether they fall within the public right of way or if they're on private property, et cetera. So that I think is something that I still would need to work with Mike on before we pass this along to him to evaluate. But that's a fairly extensive list. And then just one representation of how, ultimately this might play out if we're able to access a database through ArcGIS or be able to capture a location in the GIS viewer that the city has, be able to see where sidewalks are located, bus stops, plot lines of properties, and then spaces in the city right of way that could be potentials for tree plantings. So that was it.
I want to thank Jeff for working on this and taking this on through the Arbor Committee. Just a little bit more background, and then if there are any comments or questions. So because we decided to skip our August meeting, we did a lot of business in July. Normally what we're doing tonight, we do in August, and then we have input, and then Mike would come back with a final planting list and a schedule in September normally. So we're just we'll do that a month behind. That's not a problem. This is to encourage all commissioners to have another look, walk around your neighborhoods, talk to people. If there are other opportunities that Mike could evaluate, that would be wonderful. We can build on that. As Jeff said, we can build on that. We have some time between now and the next meeting, although I think Mike would appreciate it if we were to set a goal of trying to get possible planting locations to him in the next week or so, rather than right before the meeting. So he'll have a chance to prepare his final list and suggestions I don't know in the past, but I believe this falls, this is Mike's professional area of expertise. We have some input. This is our opportunity, and then Mike presents it to us. And generally we'll discuss it. It's not a votable item, but it's certainly something that we come to a consensus on as to what we want to see focus for the planting for next year. So, and then I would reiterate what I said at the top of the meeting for anybody watching this on any of the city platforms. If you have some place in your neighborhood or that you know of that you think would be a good location for a tree, that's information you could get to Mike as well. So I encourage everybody to help build this list. Are there any comments or questions on the list? I see Mark Rylander's hand went up. Mark?
Sorry, can you hear me okay? I'm trying this on an iPad for the first time.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm curious whether we're going to have, I noticed in the agenda packet there are the proposed tree planting locations for this year. I just wanted to put out there that I think having developed many weighted ranking matrices for deciding on, strategies in my career, I've noticed that there's a tendency for a system like that to trend towards a bit of a status quo. And I thought I might sort of be a contrarian on this one and suggest that maybe, we have a much more explicit priority from year to year and say, like, this is the year we're going to really plant in low canopy neighborhoods. Because, having seen Peggy's presentation and the amount of time we spent talking about the importance of low canopy neighborhoods, you plug that into the weighting system and it gets a couple other points, but you're never really going, if you count that as just one point among many, you're never really going to make it a kind of priority unless you really weight the hell out of it and give it 10 points and give everything else 1. So I'm wondering how we get to where we have, a really specific idea about not just like we've looked at the whole city and we've looked at a whole bunch of criteria and we've had a bunch of suggestions and this is what came out, but viewing the actual proposed list seems like it's heavily unweighted towards low canopy neighborhoods to me. So I guess I'm saying, why do we have to have this weighting system? And I'm questioning the weights on it, having really thought about it and looked at it a little bit, seeing what the results of it seem to be, which is sort of hard. It's hard to look at the list and actually tell from the list what our intentions actually were.
Well, could I propose that this was developed, I think last year, Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, so, or it was refined last year. I might propose that we use this, that Mike have some guidance from us generally, but that we could certainly look at what this means in real terms when he provides us his list of proposed locations, at least for this year. So perhaps do sort of a hybrid where I understand what you're saying, Mark, and it might end up that we're not going to address the priorities as we see them today, but I suppose we could come back in October and say, okay, what does this matrix give us? And then if we need to adjust or tweak it at that point, especially based on the average, we should also know when we talk about this next month, like how many trees does Mike really think we're going to plant in terms of our resources, staff resources, financial resources? Because I think that might also help us make some final decisions for this year's planting list. I don't, that's one suggestion. There may be others. Tim, you want to follow on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Mark, I think your comments are really well considered, and I had a similar thought, which is that the 3-2-1 for the low canopy neighborhoods don't seem like they're going to move the needle. Your reflections were much more comprehensive and articulate, so I second that. I also don't know that we need to be dogmatic with the rankings and saying the 25 top scores get planted and 26 through whatever don't. I would personally support some customization, and as long as whatever is getting planted is among the highest scoring, I think, Mike's expertise and contextualization and having a balanced set of outcomes suggests that maybe, you pick the first 15 and the next 15 are all kind of among the highest ranking, but that's kind of just conjecture more than anything. I don't know that we need to use these numbers as the single decision-making data point. I was actually going to respond to something else Jeff mentioned or recommends, which is, you know, having a criteria for playgrounds. I just generally want to second that as somebody who spends a lot of time on playgrounds and in our hot environment. I was at the Venable Ladybug Playground, as we call it, with my kids 2 Saturdays ago. It was about 90-some degrees on that side, and we went over to the part with the spider web climbing thing, and it was probably 75 degrees and extremely pleasant. And so that same pattern happens all throughout the city. You know, under the maples at Washington Park is very nice. Under the sycamores at McGuffey Park Playground, super nice. But it's just a stark contrast. So I know that you have to have clearance from different use zones on playgrounds, and different equipment has different sort of clearance areas. But if you look at those restrictions and then look at aspect, I think we would find a couple, you know, small number of strategic locations for new shade trees around city or school playgrounds that could really be a benefit.
I'll respond to that quickly, and then I see Peggy has her hand up. I mean, we had this conversation, Mike and Peggy and I met last week, and looking at that Venable Playground, we'll go take another look at it. But it seemed in that conversation that perhaps where we should be focused is early in the process. So to get to Tim's point, you know, you get to a point where you have a particular kind of mulch that's code and you can't plant trees around. We come too late to the game, right? We come and say we want trees there. And so I think if we agree as a commission that playgrounds, schools and playgrounds would be a priority for the children of our community, then we need to have some input early on in the process going forward, so that we maximize the opportunity that we will actually be able to get some shade there. I'm not saying that Venable is, you know, decided outcome and that we won't find an opportunity to, but looking ahead, we really have to focus early in the process so that we're representing the value of trees as these playgrounds are being designed and conceived. So I agree with that entirely. Peggy?
Yeah, oops, can I lower my hand? This really, I want to praise Mike for starting this, though, priorities, because before we were kind of just, we didn't have really any scoring system. So not that it doesn't need to be tweaked, but I think it was a great thing that he did to start it. But I, you know, as Jeff showed you, when I went to Venable and saw those 2 playgrounds, I thought, oh my goodness, you know, we have schools and parks not listed very high. And within schools and parks, to me, there are some very important places where we should be planting trees, playgrounds. But I also, and I don't know how to define this, but gathering places. For instance, at Lugo McGinnis, the alternative school, they have an outdoor area with picnic tables, but it's right in the sun. So, you know, to me, that's a high priority area too. I mean, it's where on the school grounds and parks where people play, gather, or sit. And I don't know how to, that should be higher priority given to those areas, because as Jeff pointed out, if you don't have shade, it makes those spaces unusable in the hot weather. And we have hot weather from May to October. So I think we need to look at that. So I think that Jeff and Mike and the Arbor Committee ought to get together and see if we can tweak this according to what you've heard today before the next meeting.
And again, I think we can have a robust conversation about this to address Mark's concern, which I think we all see that and agree with it. I think we'll use this as a tool to get us to a place, and then we'll have a conversation. So Mike can present us, based on all of this input, he can present us his suggestions. And
Jeff,
then we can look at what that means.
Yeah. Jeff, under where you put play, gather, and sit applies to schools and parks. Okay, not
Will
just
do.
schools.
Yeah.
And again, because these places are only going to become less hospitable over time, right? So if we don't get in early and we don't plant trees now, I don't want to be negative or a doomsayer, but I don't think they're going to get any less hot anytime soon. So I think this is very important. So good stuff. Thank you again to Jeff for jumping in and doing that work for Arbors. So we'll have a
Thank
lot
you all.
more to talk about next month on that. The last of our committees, I know that they had a meeting. You all met. I thought it was August. I lost track of your email. I apologize, Tim, but that was July. So do you want to apprise us of your committee's work and a little summary of your meeting?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Brian. I know I checked too, and in some ways it seems like we just met a couple weeks ago, but then in other ways, I can't believe it hasn't been since July 28th. But summertime and limited opportunities to meet as committees. So I was actually going to first just talk about how among our committee members, we've got the liaison to the city's comp plan, affordable housing plan, and zoning ordinance process, the Seville plans together process. That's me. That committee met on September 1st. And I think, as everybody knows, most of the focus has been on affordable housing plan and then the land use chapter. That's a paraphrase, but for shorthand, the land use chapter and the future land use map, with the residential districts being kind of, the main emphasis, building off of the interest in the affordable housing plan. So I do my best to track along and try to advocate for not just environmental stuff or open space stuff, but really tree canopy. And I can gladly report that there was some language this time about tree canopy as a goal. And I can share a little bit of that presentation just real briefly. Let's see. Is this showing up?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so this is kind of the summary slide from the consultants, but I raised my hand and was able to affirm that having tree canopy as an explicit goal is extremely important, whereas other slides just talked about access to natural areas or protection of natural resources or proximity to open space, all of which are great things, but that is just kind of dancing around, I think, one of our primary issues in the city, which is getting some tree canopy in our neighborhoods and other mixed use areas, commercial areas, anywhere we can, basically. So you can see how they had a broad environmental issue category, but I was so pleased to see tree canopy as an explicit goal or consideration. And when I pointed that out, as Brian was mentioning earlier, and as Peggy has said, I was able to very rapidly point out this is not just about environmental sustainability or climate justice. It's also about environmental justice and equity. We talked about briefly how the whole conversation around sensitive neighborhoods or places facing higher displacement pressure are the low canopy neighborhoods and are the formerly redlined neighborhoods. And how Jeremy Hoffman at the Science Museum of Virginia has done awesome research on this, showing it's not just a Charlottesville or a Virginia issue, it's coast to coast and border to border. It's an American issue. So I was able to touch on that quickly and talk about how this is also quality of life and public health, and how when you get under 20% tree canopy, you're getting into sort of a crisis situation with, exposure to heat related illness and issues, behavioral issues in children. So I keep hitting those notes whenever I can, but I will concede there's not a lot of space to talk about that during these steering committee meetings for Seville plans together. I guess our hope as a committee is that we're going to have more sort of fertile ground to work in with this zoning rewrite process that's coming up. So you can see the sort of Gantt chart here. They've got highlighted in red, revise and finalize the plan, which is the comprehensive plan, before pivoting in later this calendar year to the zoning review and rewrite process. I don't know that the committee and the consultants and frankly the community are ready to pivot away from the comp plan, but it's scheduled to happen in the relatively near future. So as I always say, our committee wants to be well prepared to have feedback for the consultants to kind of take under advisement. And we're trying to kind of organize a lot of different thoughts into some kind of well-crafted, punchy things like statements of purpose. So these are our draft recommendations. I'm actually going to go ahead and read these so you can hear them and see them. But recommendation 1, increase the sustainability of new development and redevelopment projects through enhanced minimum standards or development requirements for street trees and other canopy trees. And then 2, ensure the development and redevelopment projects actually achieve improved outcomes relating to tree canopy objectives by refining site plan application requirements and site plan review process. And each of these would have, specific steps or objectives we can flesh out. Just looking at the high level recommendations at this point. Number 3, increase the sustainability of new development and redevelopment projects through improved site inspections and other enforcement efforts throughout the entire construction process. And then 4, establish and enforce stronger consequences for non-compliance with tree protection requirements and or minimum standards for street trees and other canopy trees. So this may look a little different to our committee members than when Vicki and Jeff and Mark and I met earlier this summer. But the goal here was initially to focus on kind of like tree replacement. And I think tree replacement maybe wants to be a little broader to include replacing trees that were supposed to be protected or planting trees off-site that cannot be accommodated for any particular reasons, whether it's utilities or site-specific reasons. And in such cases, having the developer do much more than a one-for-one tree replacement off-site as a way to try to incentivize or require on-site tree plantings around these infill or other development projects. But if it really can't happen for valid reasons, allow for a fund or for off-site plantings in a kind of 3-to-1 ratio, for example, or something to that effect. So I'm curious if anybody, committee or anybody on the commission, has thoughts on sort of these 4 big buckets. And as I said, we'll have lots of examples among each of these, and we've kind of drafted a list, and I've been working to kind of reorganize these into those 4 buckets. But I think we need to have those high-level statements or recommendations to get the point across kind of clearly and quickly before we get into more technical recommendations or requests.
That's great. I want to thank Tim and the committee for their work on this. This is obviously an ongoing process. So we want to continue to have this discussion, but for this meeting, are there any comments or questions or reflections so far?
I have one. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. It's Mark. First of all, I wanted to just mention to the rest of the committee, when we had our subcommittee meeting, I thought it was so cool the way that we're starting to use Google Documents. And of course, I wasn't aware when they were being modified. I haven't quite figured out how to be alerted, but I sort of felt like the whole committee was, we had this place where all our documents were that we could get to, which was kind of a fun thing. And I think, Tim really did a great job of sort of sharpening what the issues are. And I think keeping it to 3 or 4 like that is great. I would think at some point with the zoning coming up that we need to address the street right-of-way widths as part of the decision process related to setbacks. And I can go into more detail on that later, but I think if we just talk about sort of development where we're talking about what happens on the private side of the line, and I think what happens on the private side of the line, especially relative to street trees, changes depending on what the street that the development is on. Like zoning tends not to do that. It just sort of shows what the private property is zoned as, and a project might be acceptable in one part of Charlottesville and totally unacceptable in another, depending on the street it's located on. So that's all I have to add.
I see Tim nodding. Jean?
Yeah, for a while I was on the Board of Zoning Appeals in Bloomington, Indiana, and we already had these things in our zoning code. But what I kept seeing over and over and over again was that the city never had the enforcement staff to make the system work. And I don't know if you can do something about that in the actual zoning code, but it was a problem. And you can write down all of these things, but the developers just knew they could run circles around the one or two people that did enforcement, and those people couldn't. It was a rapidly growing town. They couldn't keep up with every site. And so things would not get done. And then they would not have anything but like a little weak slap on the wrist for these developers. And the result was that what was in the code often didn't get enforced really in a strong way. And I don't know how to accomplish that, but it's a big problem in a small town that has a small staff.
Yep, that's an excellent point, and it's one of the things that is been very frustrating. You're right, you can write anything and you need to follow up on it, and you need to have some enforcement, and also I don't want to say penalties, but the consequences have to be a little bit more dire than they are currently.
Yeah, and Gene, I think that's right. I think there's some similarities between your former community and what we're seeing in Charlottesville based on our own observations and experiences and some feedback from staff, from Mike and the county city engineer and others. Initially, when we were working on this, a lot of our effort was on the development standards aspect of it and the requirements and form and things like that. But yeah, I noticed in reviewing the steering committee information, they're looking to rewrite the development standards as well as the administration. So that would be where the enforcement rules and things come into effect. And you're right that staffing is always going to be the governor on how well that happens, but we're definitely putting some effort and a lot of focus into that administration part, including what you have to do to submit so that the review process can be clear and effective and efficient. But then, a lot of inspections and consequences need to be maybe a little bit enhanced or, improved.
We need to be, I guess this is what this is pointing at, is we need to be aware of all the opportunities and the points in which we need to be proactive, involved, and make sure that, especially this is our one cut at this for a long time to come, maybe 10 years, maybe 12 years, maybe 15 years. So we need to be at the table at the beginning. And so I encourage more, that was a great comment, Gene, I encourage more input from the commission to be sent to Tim so that he can continue to add on to this and report back to us, and so that we're in a place to really go forward when we get into this zoning process. There's one last hand up is Peggy.
Yeah, Tim, thank you for doing that. That's great. And this might not be codes, but it bothers me sometimes our own public works department or the contractors that the city hires don't follow our own standards. And I was just reminded that going past Charlottesville High School today, where they're fixing the bridge on Melbourne, I guess it is, near the stadium. There's a huge, nice oak and it's got equipment all over it. And, maybe it had to be or whatnot, but certainly we wouldn't allow that on a construction or not. We try to have tree protection measures so it doesn't happen on a developer site. But I don't know if there's some way in the codes that these things apply to our own city and the contractors they hire too, not just to the private developers. I mean, these protection measures or whatever.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Thanks, Peggy. So we'll have a lot more follow-up reports next month. The committee's made good use of the summer, and I thank them all for their work and look forward to, as we develop these items further. Mike, we perpetually dig into Mike's time, but as we know, we're here till 7, so we have some time. Mike gains back at the end of the meeting. So I'm going to let Mike go ahead and give us his report on several issues. I know some of these are just sort of brief status updates. So.
Sure. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. The first thing I wanted to talk about is I'm not going to go over the charts that Peggy that we talked about. with Peggy as far as number of trees planted. Those charts, I want to, with the caveat that they are, there's one tree that is not showing up in the data. It's not going to affect the data significantly, obviously, but I have to go through and find out which one is missing. So we were able to plant 23 trees, and then we had a donation tree that's planted by Dominion in Washington Park. So that's what we were able to plant last year. And while I'm talking about that, so last year, we'll talk about this is the CIP for tree planting. Last year we spent, to plant those 23 trees, we spent $10,480, and that's all just in tree planting. So what we had left over in the CIP for tree planting was $7,650. So that was not enough to cover the 23 trees. So we were able to take 1475 from the, this is called Funds for the Forest, this is our donation account. So it effectively wiped out the donation account, and then the remainder, $1,355 came from the operating budget, because we did have the commitment to plant the 23 trees, and we were very adamant about that for last year. So go back up. So for those of you that are new to the Tree Commission, we have an operating budget for all the city trees for maintenance. So all the parks, schools, right-of-ways, cemeteries. We have $218,000. So this funding is for, this is for storm damage, this is for tree pruning, this is for removals, and this is annually, and it's been 2018 for a number of years, I believe since 2018. So this is all of our maintenance, stump grinding and things come out of here. Emerald ash borer treatments, Dutch elm disease treatments come out of here. So this is all operational. So we spent all of the budget last year, but at the end of 2020, fiscal year 2020, there's purchase orders that were encumbered in May, and then they were paid in the next fiscal year. That's why the actual reflects a different number than the actual budget. So that's not important, but that if someone's wondering why this isn't adding up, it's just how it was encumbered and how the procurement department decided to show it this year. But our budget is $218,000, and it was all spent. So are there any questions about that?
I see a couple of hands. I see Peggy.
Sorry to be asking so many questions. Mike, I'm wondering, on one of those charts, you had a number for tree preservation. The commission might not realize, but I'm not sure what year it was, maybe 2018. We asked City Council to increase the tree maintenance budget by $50,000 for more proactive preservation, to maintain our best trees. And I'm just wondering, Mike, that says tree preservation on that chart, but it looks like the same as tree planting. So I wonder, do you keep track of what you might spend of that 50 on actual proactive tree preservation?
Yeah, that would be easy to find out. It would just be a matter of going back and looking through the spreadsheet. So we could figure that out if there's interest there.
Is that a hard thing to do?
Takes some time, but
yeah,
the commission would like to know that. We can find that out.
Well, we can talk about it. We're just hoping that, that money, since we asked for the increase, would go toward more preserving our most important trees, but
Sure.
I don't want to put a lot of work on you. I mean, maybe we could track it going forward or something, would be easier instead of going back.
Okay.
What do you think, Brian?
Yes, I'm sorry. I was trying
I
to
was saying-
monitor other
I was saying-
comments.
I was just saying, I asked you, instead of having Mike go back and track all that, because that would take some time, maybe going forward, we could track it'd be nice to know that we are hopefully spending that money on proactive preservation. Because I'm worried too about the amount of trees we're going to have to take down. And it's going to, not only for Emerald Ash Borer, but I'm seeing lots of dead trees in this community. I'm just wondering, if it's going to take up a lot of our maintenance budget, and we might want to ask for more preservation money at some point.
Yeah, I would agree. Proactive preservation. Also, we have discussed that tied into special attention to the trees that we place in the conservation ordinance to make sure that they're, I know
Yeah.
that the ordinance provides for that, but this is ideally, this is where the money is coming from to make sure that we prioritize. And as we're having this review and this conversation, I think that this is another opportunity, and I'm not sure which committee, you don't have to put up your hands, but could develop this next, but to work with Mike and one of the committees to develop here again, some kind of matrix or some way not only of tracking, but setting goals, specific goals for specific trees that we want to preserve going into a fiscal year, as opposed to a look back. And then, so that's something to consider. I think we should definitely work with Mike on, the commission should work with Mike on being clearer as to what expectations would be under, ideal circumstances, what we would want to see happen for those trees. Because in fact, that's not happening because of the resources. And once again, Mike and Todd and Peggy and I have had a fair number of conversations this year. It's an unusual year we've been through, but the resources, the problem of resources. If it's an issue of resources and this is a permanent situation, then we need to make this clear to council and to city administration that there is a real urgent need within Parks and Rec to focus on this, and especially on a budgetary level. And the commission needs to, and we've said this to Todd and to Mike, the commission needs to also we need to be more proactive in advocating for this and for help finding support for staff, both in terms of resources, the hands to do the work and the money to do the work. I was glad at the beginning that Sam Sanders, expressed the goals for the Parks and Rec. And I think that these are all real concerns. We've discussed them, and I think the commission shares these concerns. And so I would say publicly that the commission is concerned enough that we intend to take these issues up on a number of levels with city council and with city administration. At some point, we'll have a chance to sit down face to face, hopefully, and discuss this with Sam. But anyway, this is definitely on our minds, and it's on the minds of Parks and Rec. So are there any other questions about just the general budgetary issues for Mike? So that segues into CIP, Mike, and where we stand.
Sure. So as you heard, Sam Sanders, we've already advertised for the Parks and Recreation Director. So the city management is hoping to fill that position immediately as soon as possible. But I have not heard anything on the CIP process up to this point. I anticipate putting forward again another request for Emerald Ash Borer removal funding again, and then the tree planting at this time.
And I think on the planting, you've heard consensus and concern tonight that we make sure that the numbers that we put forward are healthy asks to council based on what it costs to plant trees and how much catch up we're planting.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at those, I know that some of this depends on people being in place in your office, or I guess some of it can happen in the next month or so with interim, but do you have a sense that we'll be looking at something firmer next month or November, so we can really hash this out and make sure that we're asking for enough?
Yeah, I hope by November at the latest. I hope to have something to you sooner before that. But again, if our goal is to plant 200 trees, we're looking at about $100,000 based on last year's prices. So we have to be prepared to ask for that, I think, if that's the goal.
And to be clear, that 200, I think from several commissioners tonight, that 200 ought to factor in, if not at 100%, it ought to factor in the trees that we're losing and the trees that are actually, we need to make sure that that number is enough that it's accounting for as much of what we're actually losing to make sure that we're actually getting ahead a little. So yeah, we look forward to working with you on that and to getting that into the hands of that whole process that goes on for months. So other questions about CIP at this point? So there's several issues that you've been tracking for us and that we would appreciate just a status on. So that's your third vote.
Sure. So the mall planter, I'm still waiting to hear back about how we are going to provide input for that. It looks like the code building is moving forward, and they're going to be looking for, looking at completion. So there was an issue with there's a utility issue with part of the planter. So it seemed to me that all the species options were still on the table. They did not come to us formally for input. They did not come to me formally for input. So I'm still waiting for that. The canopy study is it's out, it's posted, it closes Friday. So we're hoping to hear back about that. And I think I have the completion date for the end of November for the project. I think I specified that. So looking at early December. So hopefully we could have something ideally for the annual State of the Forest. The Garrett Street trees, also I went and did the arborist report for all of them. There was nothing really surprising. So there were some really great trees. There's some that had a couple of issues, but overall, I recommended all of them move forward. There's one tree that was listed as a pin oak. It's a red oak. I made those changes and things like that. Were there any questions about any of the arborist reports?
So just since it's been 2 months, just to refresh everybody's memory. So we voted on these trees, and then the next step, of course, is for Mike to do his assessment. We've had a chance to look at the assessment. In the past, what we've done is if we've had any issues or we've had the opportunity to discuss them, and we've actually worked some issues out in the past with cemetery trees. I don't see anything in there that are issues, but this is the opportunity for the commission to have a final conversation with Mike about this. We don't have to vote on the packet again. If there are no objections, then what we'll do is we'll put a cover letter on from the commission to the packet. And then we'll forward this through the proper channels, and this will go to council for its consideration. So this is really the last opportunity for general input from the commission. So anybody have any issues or comments, questions? So again, to refresh memories, the points that were raised in July about that we wanted to hit with council, what I'll do is I'll draft a letter and circulate it, so there'll be input from all commissioners. But the points we wanted to hit about this is that this is considered, I'm going to use a word that Peggy's used elsewhere in the city, but this is essentially a grove of trees. They're important. They're important to that entire street. They're being put forward as a group of trees. To be considered as a group of trees. Also to stress that they happen to be on a street in which we've seen in the last year or so the loss of many trees. So we're going to contextualize it and stress as much as possible why the commission thought it was important to put this group of trees forward. So it's not just going to be a list of the trees and you can see the details in here, but we'll make in the letter as strong and succinct a case as possible for why these trees are being put before council. So you'll all have a chance to look at that letter before it goes out and have some input. I don't know what the schedule is, Mike, in terms of when we plan to get it to council, but you may know better what the calendar is.
Sure. If we could get everything wrapped up by the end of the week, I think October 7th would be the soonest we could get it on the agenda.
Okay. Since it's Tuesday, we might in the week, we might kick it into, if need be, to the second meeting in October, just to give people time to comment.
Okay.
since I haven't drafted the letter yet, and I would really want input from the commission before we send that out. I mean, this is a really important statement. It is essentially the executive summary. I know there are executive summaries in the packet, but if we can't hook from the beginning, then it's going to look like a thick packet of trees, and eyes may glaze over, and the significance may be lost on people. And also, to be quite honest, this is not going in a vacuum. These trees are going in an area where there's lots of stakeholders and future development. So I think we really need to make sure that we have a very good, strong statement. So in that case, I think it's better to give ourselves a little bit more time. So be on the lookout for that. I see Tim's hand is up. Comment?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. We're going to riff off of your comment about, we've all been talking about this as a grove. This is kind of a more than the sum of its parts. And Mike, just skimming through this kind of last minute, I do want to say there might be a chance to talk about how, because of their location along Garrett Street, and the planned redevelopment, it does deserve and would benefit from protection through the ordinance, but also maybe there's like a corollary to that, which is preserving those will be of value to the public-private redevelopment of that whole residential or mixed-use project. I think we all know that, but there might be an opportunity to emphasize that we're preserving these for the benefit of the future residents, or yeah.
Health in particular, as we've said many times, urban health. So Mark Z.
Yeah, as far as our community is concerned, I think often the community has no idea what the tree commission is supposed to do or is able to do. And I think this is one of the ways where the tree commission could show to the community that we really care and are trying very hard to make a difference. Because as we've seen, so much development side takes advantage of the lack of resources to just do what they want. And so I think by protecting these trees, it gives some credibility to the value of the city having a tree commission. So making a really strong statement here, I think, is powerful, or could be.
Yeah, very good point. Thanks. So before we go to public comments, there is an issue that is not on the agenda that Mike and Peggy and I talked about last week, and it ties into the mall. So first of all, to sort of go back to Mike's update on the mall planter, Mike understands, and I think we've expressed in several meetings, I've expressed that, and to go back to Jean's point and to basically to pull all the threads together, we know what can happen is that if we're not proactive, which Mike is being, on that planter between Omni and the new code building, I will just say, and I'll speak for the commission, that we would not be happy if that went ahead and we had no input. These are mall trees. If there's any one place in the city where we have we've been charged with counsel to advise it, is on the protection of our public trees. So we need to be able to protect the trees on the mall. So and I've said that before, but I just feel like I want to state that again, because it's very important. These things can go ahead, and the next thing you know, they're planted, and we've had no significant input, and they are trees perhaps that don't really enhance, or they don't provide the canopy. So that's just to speak to the mall trees generally. The mall RFP, which we've been pushing along slowly, and which we had hoped to have a revised draft for you to review tonight, will continue to move along slowly for a couple of reasons. One is that I did not make as much progress myself on it over the past 8 weeks, but also because we're sensitive to the fact that there's transition in Parks and Rec. Mike alone can't make final decisions on what's going to go into what is, after all, a very complicated and potentially controversial project dealing with mall trees. So that's still moving slowly, and but it will progress. There is an issue that arose on the mall, Mike reached out to me back, I don't know, Mike, back in July, I think it was, on a Friday. And then we discussed it, and then it involved one of the mall trees and a private property owner. And we discussed it, and then Mike took the steps that were needed to reflect that back to the property owner. Subsequently, last week, we found out that work was done on that tree after all, and would have been against Mike's recommendation for the tree, was done by a property owner. And so we delved into this, and I asked Mike, Peggy and I asked Mike to give us some background onto what is the process for property owners. What is the process for any work that happens on the trees on the mall? And I think maybe I'm going to turn it to Mike and just maybe give a little bit more background as to the issue and to how we came to one of the trees, which the tree commission is charged with protecting as a public tree, and not just any public tree, but a public tree in a public place of multiple use for the citizens of the community. How after all of that, pruning was done on the tree that essentially, and I don't want to put words in Mike's mouth, but would have gone against Mike's professional assessment. So can you provide the commission a little bit more background on that so we can discuss it?
Sure. So just for your reference, if someone has to do something to a tree on the mall, they aren't authorized to prune the tree or do tree work on the mall because it's maintained by the city, and we come in with our arborist, and we'll do the maintenance of clearing them from building structures and really just pruning dead wood. That's pretty much the only pruning we do on the mall. So I had, there's a private interest that was looking to do work on their building on the mall. And they're creating like an addition on top of their building, which was in direct conflict with one of the mall trees. And they needed crane access to do the work on this building. So if someone's going to work in a public space, there is an application process where they have to apply to do that if they're going to work in the right of way, and that goes through NDS. And so they notified me, and they said, they might need to prune the mall tree. Can you please get with them and look at this? So I met with them the first time, and it sounded like very minimal pruning. They looked like they needed 2 small limbs that were probably 2-inch limbs. It was very minimal. It was just really additional building clearance. And I said, what we should do is we will do it with the city's contractor because they're city trees. And then we will, we'll agree beforehand on the cost, and we'll send you the bill for the tree pruning. So that was how it was left. Came back, I believe it was 2 or 3 weeks later, they called me and they asked me to meet with the crane operator of what he needed pruned away from the tree, from the building, for his crane access. And it was substantial. It was several large limbs that were 4 inches in diameter that you would need to cut back to the trunk. And it would really change just how the whole block looks and the shape of the tree. So I told him we're not interested in doing that. We're not going to prune that much off the tree. So it's kind of left at that. Then I met with the building owner who wanted to talk about it. I met with him, and it was just, we weren't able to prune the tree how they wanted. So then it was left at that. And then I came back, and they've taken it upon themselves to prune the tree. So they cut it back from the building, and they did not make proper pruning cuts. I have a couple pictures I'm going to share with you. They kind of just stubbed them off. When you make a proper pruning cut, and why we were not able to just cut it back to provide clearance for them, you have to cut back to a lateral branch that is 1/3 of the size of the branch that you're cutting to assume apical dominance, which means that if you don't do that, the branch will just die. You're not really gaining anything. It's not a proper pruning cut. It's not good for the tree. It creates a wound that will never heal. So that's why we were not willing to cut the trees that way. Just give me 1 second. I'll share a couple pictures. Can everybody see this? So this is 414 East Main Street, and you can see that it's just stubbed off. So yeah, you can see that white eye from a block away. You can see it there. And this is it from below.
So could you also please clarify, there are a lot of issues here. We're not going to solve them tonight, but the end result of this should be that the commission needs to have, there needs to be a better policy, and there needs to be better notification of the city arborist. But can you explain to the commission the right that property owners have, how much of the tree they can take going through this NDS process?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of the question.
How much pruning could they do as by right over their property?
Sure. So in Virginia, you are legally allowed to cut to your property line. And if there's a neighboring tree hanging over your property, you can cut what is above your property.
So a couple of things emerged from our conversation last week, which we thought were rather troubling. One is that in this process, which understandably through NDS, there is a right to do some pruning on your property line. And you could theoretically, as was done here, of course, you could get on there and hit them all and you could prune. It doesn't appear that there's any notification that comes back or that the city arborist is any way involved in this, even though this is a public tree. And that's just unacceptable. It just is. And so that's something that we want to address, that going forward, because this is the result of not having somebody with eyes on to say this far, but no farther. This is a public tree and we do our best to maintain them. We spend a lot of resources on them. They're beloved by the community. They shade people who dine there. They shade walkers. They benefit all of the property owners and all of the community, not an individual property owner. So I think there are some process issues here, which we're not going to resolve tonight, but that we definitely need to look into further, because this essentially is an end run around Parks and Rec and the city arborist, who specifically said that you can't do this and we don't want this done. We had offered to do the right work, and then there was a use of another process that didn't involve, it appears, Parks and Rec or the city arborist. I find that outrageous, frankly. And I think Mike is frustrated too, because he's essentially kind of caught in the middle here. He took the steps, he reached out to me, we discussed it. We agreed that we needed to put this off and we needed to discuss this further. And then we have the situation. I don't know if there has ever been a policy where private property owners, clearly through this process, it seems like the person charged with overseeing the preservation of the trees is cut out. So that's one thing. But I think we need to make sure that this does not serve as a precedent, because we're about to embark on a very expensive study of the trees, which will lead to long-term, maybe many years, but a very expensive solution and replacement of the trees. Meanwhile, we're trying to preserve them. And this should not be a message to the business community that this is acceptable, because it is absolutely not acceptable. In all my time in the Tree Commission, I think I find this most outrageous, because it involves a public good that has been harmed for private interests. And these are public trees. We say we can't protect private trees on private property. We can only protect trees on public property. Well, this is public property. And we need to make sure that this doesn't happen again. My other concern, and Mike can correct me on this, but my understanding was that when Mike first looked at it and realized it was going to take more, and then thought afterwards it might even take more to get the equipment on the mall. What we expressed to Mike last week is that somehow they can't get another bite at the apple at this tree. I mean, somehow we can't come back to this situation 2 or 3 weeks from now and find out that they went back on the mall because they couldn't access the building and they cut even more. And I don't know what that process is. I don't know if it's reaching out to the city attorney's office. I'm not sure. We haven't had time since we talked to Mike last week. But we're going to have some kind of response. But since we had a meeting, I thought it would be very important to hear that tonight. I hate to end on that note, but personally, I'm quite angry. And again, Mike, Mike is caught in the middle here. We need to understand how this could happen. We need to make sure no more happens to this tree. And we need to make sure that this is not a precedent for what can be done to the trees. Because if it is, maybe we should just stop writing the moral RFP and spending $100,000 to figure out how to preserve and have, these trees and replacement trees. So again, I hate to end on this note, but I will open it up. Mike, if I've said anything here that's not correct, or if you want to add anything for the benefit of the commission, please do so. But I'll open it up to comments or questions. And I know the commission is this is the first time you're hearing about it. It wasn't officially on the agenda, but I think I actually would have sent out an email if we didn't have a meeting so that you all were apprised of this. So anybody want to comment or question? I saw Tim's hand go up.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I just agree with your sentiments and articulation. I think as one suggestion, maybe a joint debrief with City Parks and Rec, NDS, and as you recommended, the City Attorney's Office. And if the permit for this type of work in the public right of way is supposed to go through NDS, they'd be an important part of that debrief and strategy session. And I think it is, when you get into enforcement, having one of the city attorney's staff members there is extremely important or helpful to guide the process.
Yeah, excellent comment. And it goes back to what Gene said earlier, you can have the process, but you sort of have to be vigilant and you have to make sure that you're following up. So Peggy?
This is a good example, and we've seen it happen before, that a lot of the departments don't coordinate very well. Another example is, just a month or so ago, the Sustainability Department, which is in Public Works, sent out a request for volunteers to do a heat island study in the Charlottesville. Well, the Tree Commission has been beating the drum about heat islands for at least a year, and Mike didn't know anything about it. We didn't know anything about it. But anyway, I think that's something we need to talk to Sam about. There needs to be more coordination. But anyway, but also as Brian and Mike and I talked about these trees last year, it sort of came to my attention like, why in the world aren't we protecting these trees? I mean, the mall trees are probably the most important, at least one of the most important groups of trees, if not the most important trees in the city. And they are not under our conservation ordinance. I know that over time things will change and some of them might have to come down, but that's true of any of the trees we have in the conservation ordinance. All trees have a lifespan, just like we do. And our ordinance gives a right for Mike or the city manager or city council to take trees down, even if they're under the conservation ordinance. But I think the Arbor Committee, that we ought to look at these trees as our next application for the tree ordinance. I mean, for the tree protection, because that would give us actually more bite. Because if someone harms the trees in any way, there is a financial penalty within the ordinance. So it would give us more, more ability to go after someone who did what they did, took a runaround by Mike.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we definitely need to investigate that, and that may be our next batch of trees that we recommend. What is remind me, the penalty? I think there's just a set fine. Is it 10,000?
I think it's up to 25. Yeah, I think it's up to 2,500 per offense.
Yeah. So I saw Jeff Otten, and then we'll go to the other Jeff. Jeff Otten's hand went up first.
I totally agree with Peggy, and I understand you're being upset, Brian. It's outrageous. Does the Tree Commission ever write letters, like op-ed letters, and publicly shame people? I mean, is it possible to put something in the paper about, like, this is an outrageous affront to public property? It's like vandalism to a certain degree. Is there some way to pen something like that could actually put people on notice? It's not okay.
Well, I mean, I'm using this meeting in a way, I mean, we have the opportunity since we're meeting once again via Zoom. We thought we'd be in person, but one of the great things about this is that, believe it or not, there are going to be hundreds of people tuning in on different platforms. So, I mean, this is one way to say the Tree Commission is registering its outrage. I think we could do more. My concerns are if this was the process and the city arborist was not included in this permitting process and this actual work, like to be on site, to see the work being done and to be able to say, stop, you've gone too far, then we need to address that. More immediate, I just want to make sure, because when Mike and I talked about this, we were both heading out on vacation and we felt like we had done what we could to protect these trees. I don't want to find out in a week or two that more is taken out of the trees. So the most immediate thing is, how are we going to make sure that tree is not damaged any further? And I think Mike knows that, and he's making inquiries and making sure that this one instance is stopped. Secondly, that the message doesn't go out that this is acceptable. So to your point, Jeff, perhaps there needs to be some statement, maybe when, as Tim said, maybe when we can come up with, position and talk to the city attorney and say, there's a new policy and you can't do this. I'll leave it up to others if they want to shame individual, property owners. You know where the tree is and you know the property. And, I said specifically to Mike, we wouldn't get into those details tonight, although you know the address, but yeah, anyway. Mark R.
I just wanted to suggest that maybe the most immediate thing to do would be to approach Lisa Robertson and try to understand the context of what the rights and responsibilities of properties on the mall are. I mean, obviously it's a limited access area. I doubt that this is the first time that somebody has worked on their facade or done construction. And there's probably something written into, requirements of what it means to be a building on the mall. So I would have that information in front of us before we, take any action. It probably, if nothing like that exists, I'd be kind of surprised. But I would go right to Lisa before doing anything else and just say how could this happen? Ask her.
No, I agree. I mean, one of the things we discussed last week, the three of us, was that we would reach out to the city attorney's office. But at a minimum, if that is, and again, I want to be careful here. I mean, if the property owner did, to a certain point on that tree, did what they were allowed by law to do and went through the process and the permitting process, that's fine, except any work that's done to those trees, especially by a private property owner and a private contractor, because again, they were offered for the city to do the work properly. If that work is done, and it is not somewhere in the process that Mike is involved to oversee that, then that's a fundamental flaw. And if that's not on the property owner, it certainly is on the city,
right? Because
they're the city's resource. So I entirely, and so my personal anger is directed at, I want to find out, like, how could this happen, and to make sure this doesn't happen again. That's essentially what it is, and to inform the commission. So
you can't remove a stop sign either.
Yeah, and again, we don't know. We still don't know. And Mike was going to make inquiries as to whether, with that amount of pruning, the work that is proposed to be done on that building can actually happen at this point. So I don't know if Mike has an update on that, but I would say that in terms of that one tree, so that's a separate issue. That one tree, we'll stay in touch, Mike, because I think the commission is very interested in knowing what is the outcome, further outcome for that one tree. Any other, I think I've responded to all the hands, the commission. So there will be further about that at the next meeting. If a letter does go, or if conversations happen with the city attorney and it happens in the next couple of weeks, we won't wait till the following meeting to apprise you. I do think this is a significant, urgent issue. So we have gone into, yeah.
One other thing, it looks like Jacqueline is an attendee versus a panelist. I don't know if there's some complication with her getting into Zoom, and she has her hand raised? I don't know. if it's
Yes, so
possible.
I was going to, thank you, Jeff. We still have a few minutes and we apologize to communications. We may go over just a couple minutes. We're usually perfectly on time, but
Oh, that's
to
fine.
allow for public comment. So we do have members of the public. And so anybody who wants to comment or question the commission.
So right now we just have Jacqueline. I will bring her in and allow her to talk.
Hi there. I apologize. I don't know what happened. I didn't get the correct link, but I just had one thought. Brian, I share your frustration. One thought I had would be to reach out in terms of your concern about precedent to the Downtown Merchants Association. And once we sort of get all the details and the facts straight, I think that would be a cohort worth meeting with or copying on correspondence in the future. Because your point is well taken about not wanting this to happen again. And I think it's got a little bit of the element of not hiding this incident and making it a little bit more public. So that would be just a thought that immediately comes to mind. And Jeff, I had the same thought about a letter to the editor, because I think it's just another way to hit home what the tree commission is trying to do and the impediments that really shouldn't be in our way.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And I share all your points that there's a bit more fact finding to be done here. And obviously we're not going to run off, but at some point, this could be a multi-pronged effort where we, as Tim said, where we actually sit with the departments and the city attorney and figure out how can we put a better process in place. And it may also require informing the public that this is really not acceptable to treat trees this way. So I agree with those points. Are there other, I know we had a number of members of the public. Anybody else in the public have comments or questions?
Brian, I just wanted to ask Jacqueline, I can't believe this is happening again. You did not get the right link for the meeting?
No, I didn't. So I've been shooting you. I apologize if you get a million emails. I tried to reach out to you guys just to get the right one. No worries. I was able to hear everything and listen. So
But that's not acceptable if you didn't get the right link. That's not acceptable.
no, but I was able to be, I've been in attendance the whole time.
Brian and I still been dealing with this for I don't know how long, and I can't believe you didn't get the right link. Sorry.
No worries. I'll reach out earlier next time.
Yeah, I share that sentiment. Thanks for your patience, Jacqueline, and thank you for commenting. Any other comments or questions from the public?
Right now we have Roxanne White with her hand raised.
Great. Hi, Roxanne.
Roxanne, you're muted.
Yeah. So I have one question and I just have a couple of comments, and that really refers to, I heard you talk about, how many people are really tuned into the tree commission, and also interested in what you all said about getting a lot of comments that are coming into the tree commission about trees and concerns, because I think, there is a lot, as you all know, there's a lot of comments right now. There's a lot of articles about heat zones. There's a lot of articles about tree cover and certainly what everybody else is doing in lots of different areas across the world to plant trees. So I think there's a lot going on, and I'm hoping that the tree commission is able to kind of ride that wave and take advantage of that. And so my perspective as somebody from the public, that you're not making it very easy to tune in to the tree commission. First of all, if you look at your web page, there is nothing on the web page that gives any type of a link of how to view the tree commission. There are no links to the agendas. There are no links to any minutes. There's no link to any documents that are out there. So I would just recommend that you really take a look at that tree commission website and really look at how you make the tree commission easier if somebody just clicks on the tree commission. It kind of leaves you dead there. It doesn't really give you any information about how to go to the other parts of the web, which are about the urban forest, which has a lot of information. I mean, it's really lacking if you're really trying to get the public involved. So that was really, and I'm not sure the other thing is that, and I'm not sure if Brian's listening, Brian Wheeler, but there's no information in the packet. I know you all get a packet of information, but for anybody in the public, that packet of information, and I'm not sure that's an FOI requirement, but information that is distributed to the commission is not out there available to the public. And so it makes that very difficult for the public to have kind of informed comments to make, because you haven't seen the information, particularly things like budget information and I don't know what was in the packet, but any of those detailed kind of information that you're sharing and talking about, if the public doesn't have access to look at those ahead of time, they really have very little ability to make comments on it. So I would just encourage you to expand your tree commission website. The other only question that I had was, and I just happened on this, there's a report that was done by the Green Infrastructure Center, and it was a whole review of the Virginia State Code for trees and forests. I don't know whether the Code Committee has looked at that, but it seemed very extensive. A lot of analysis of what the state code allows you to do right now, a lot of recommendations about what the state code could do, what localities could do to make their ordinances, particularly some of their development requirements stricter and more extensive, a lot about expanded tree canopies for developers. So I was kind of curious whether the Code Committee has looked at that and has any recommendations for any new legislation.
Is that I'll have a rehearsal schedule right at the moment.
So thanks, Roxanne, for your comments and questions. I want to get back to the meeting materials in a moment, but I think Tim might have been jotting all that information down for the committee. If not, I was writing it down. So if they haven't had the benefit of those materials, then we'll certainly find them.
It's called A Select Review of Virginia State Code for Trees and Forests.
Great.
It's a 40-page document by the Green Infrastructure Center. It's
great.
Very, very detailed. And the reason I was bringing that up is because this is the time of year that if the city is going to be putting in any requests for any legislative changes, this is when those changes should be proposed.
Yeah.
So.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. And we'll definitely incorporate it in our work. I think, we'll take a couple more minutes here. I know we usually finish at 7, but I think this is important for the commissioners and for the public. One of the frustrations is that there are multiple ways to access the tree commission. You probably have discovered this before. There are a series of pages that I understand are just maintained, not by the departments, but maintained by, it may be communications, which are standard format. They list the number of the membership and very basic information, and there's no linkage. Then there's the page within the urban forest and the Parks and Rec, which I know Mark Rylander had worked on about a year ago with Mike and tried to sort of organize that and straighten that out. The confusion that causes is that sometimes often those two are out of sync in terms of membership and whose term has expired. And so basic information, we're actually trying to update 2 pages. So if somebody just Googles the tree commission, they might be led to one page or might be led to another page. One has just very static information, which is fine. The other one has a little bit more robust information. We always welcome comments for how to make that better and how to make the links better. And then there is the page that is, and this is the one that Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but you interact with on a monthly basis. That is the one where people can actually register for the meeting and they can become either a participant or somebody watching the meeting. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that is where the city posts, and you sent it out last Thursday, that is where the city posts the agenda and the full packet. Is that correct?
That's correct. We post the whole packet. It's on the city calendar page.
So to Roxanne's point, that's sort of the confusion because there are multiple entry points and I understand some of them. Brian Wheeler and Roxanne and I had a conversation a couple of years back. And I understand the difference between those pages, but this is the confusion it would cause to the public who think that logically, if they go to our page at the Parks and Rec, they're going to have information for the upcoming meeting, but that information doesn't live there. So the question, and I know where it needs to live, and it lives on the city calendar. The question to be, the thing we need to investigate is, can we also have that information somehow posted so that if people simply go to the Parks and Rec page for the tree commission, they're going to, or the urban forest, the main page, that they're going to see links and materials to the upcoming meeting so that there's not confusion and people come to a meeting and don't feel like they've been provided access. Because to Roxanne's point, it's critical that the public have access. Until now, I assume that because the city posted it with the link to register for the meeting, that was obvious that people could get the full packet there. I will say the caveat is there've been a couple of months where we slightly missed the deadline and only the agenda went up. But the last, I want to say 5 or 6 meetings, we've gotten the majority of the packet in ahead of time to meet the city's requirements and the FOIA requirements. So I think the point
Brian,
is,
I'll go back and look, but I know when I clicked on the thing for the packet materials, the message came up that was not available. So I'll go back and try that.
yeah. And but I understand the confusion. I understand, and you know better than most people sort of where to look and you know how to navigate. So if you're having a difficult time navigating, then that means that the average member of the public who wants to know is not getting the information as easily as they should get it. So your point's valid.
And the links used to be on the old tree commission site. So that's what just had the links of where to go to find those things. That's all.
Yeah. So we need to continue to work on that, our forward face to the public. And Mike, I think on your list is to figure out how can we possibly have this information appear at most, if not all, the entry points that somebody would go to look for tree commission.
Yeah.
We could also just send a link in the chat at the beginning of every meeting to the packet.
We could, and I think we can do all of these things, but to Roxanne's point, in order for the public to be well-informed coming into a meeting, particularly in the months where we have 50 pages, the goal is to get that information to the public. And Mike can correct me, but Thursday is the deadline for a Tuesday meeting. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
And so, some months we have 80% of the material goes up on Thursday, and some months it's closer to 100%. But really the benchmark has to be that our packet for a Tuesday meeting with all of the material the public needs to be informed needs to be in place and needs to be posted by Mike on Thursday. And then if there's confusion as to where it lives, perhaps it needs to live in more than one place so that people will find it. So to address all of Roxanne's points.
Okay.
Thank you, Roxanne.
Thank you.
Would we be able to just put a link to the city calendar page on our tree commission page as a more maybe easier kind of intermediate fix?
Yeah.
I'll leave that to Mike and IT and communications to come up with the answer, but that's a good suggestion, Jeff. So anything else from public or the commission? I want to close out with the public. Are there any other public comments? I'm not hearing, so we've run a little over, but anything that we didn't cover this meeting or anything a commissioner wants to bring up very briefly, recognizing the hour.
Real quick. I was in Montana for a little bit over a week recently, primarily in Helena, and anecdotally, residential neighborhood kind of off of their downtown mall, probably comprised of about 80% ash tree. And it was shocking. I wish I had some pictures to share. I can probably get some from a contact, but I don't know if you guys would potentially be interested in hearing from their city arborist or their kind of mirror tree commission or something along those lines, as far as any future plans for what they're doing with what's going to be probably a severe problem in the next 5 to 15 years.
Maybe you could connect Mike with, provide him some contact. And we've never thought about having a commission to commission confab, which might be actually, we have sister cities, we could have a sister commission, which might be interesting, or we could share, we've talked about having guest speakers from time to time, and maybe we have one meeting a year where we're collaborating and sharing. Obviously Zoom lends itself to that. And but that's a good point. So maybe Jeff, if you could follow up with Mike on that, that would be good. So this was supposed to be an in-person meeting. Obviously, we all know how the summer progressed. So the best laid plans, the clear path. I don't know. I suspect we're going to continue in this mode for a while, but if there should be a change, and certainly a sudden change before next month, which I doubt, you will all be informed. But I think we should just assume that we're going to be living in this ether zone for a while longer. So I want to thank you all for your energy, your passion, your interest, your concern, your work, for your time, since we took more of your time. And if there's nothing else, I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you all.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.